back by popular demand. Kendamu has returned to Geekdom 101 here, and previously we discussed the reason why Gohan had to relearn his mystic power. This is a follow-up to that video. We're going to go even deeper now, talking about ki, talking about energy, ki, and really talk about how Dragon Ball takes real-world concepts like ki and energy from the Far East and incorporates them into the story. And we're going to break it down, and we're going to tell you point blank, fact versus fiction. How was the fiction influenced by the fact? So without any further ado, let me introduce him once again, the Dragon Ball community's largest consumer of mozzarella cheese, Kendamu.
Hey, did somebody say pizza?
I didn't say that. I said mozzarella cheese. I know if I said pizza, you would have lost your mind. You know what it reminds me of, bro? It reminds me of that episode of Turtles, bro, when, I crave pizza no more.
Yeah. There was another one. I remember it was a comic. It was Michelangelo was sleeping on the couch, and someone mentioned pizza, and he rose out of his deep sleep, like jumping off the couch. Did somebody say pizza? Like that's another one I have in my mind. Anyway.
They've used that joke a million times. There's some cheese left in this shredder. Shredder. That's one of my favorite episodes ever, bro.
Outside of Dragon Ball, Turtles is the other big one for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the 80s babies kind of a growth habit. Let's talk about ki. So, the real life versus the fiction. Let's talk more about how ki eyes actually work and how, I guess, Toriyama incorporated them into the series to explain why these characters are, of course, super powered in the show, but in real life, the reason why martial artists are typically very strong people mentally and physically, there's a reason for this. It's not just an accident.
So in our last video, we touched on what ki is. It comes from the Chinese concept of chi, life force, energy, and then that same kanji for chi kind of got simplified over in Japan and started to take on a meaning of your mood, your intention, your mind, and that sort of thing. So really what you see in Dragon Ball, as Dragon Ball takes a lot of Chinese inspiration but is a Japanese series, is the concept of various mental states being expressed as a form of energy. So Toriyama, like his examples that he used in an interview were Genki, which is energy, O Genki desu ka, like how are you doing? How are you feeling energetic? Courage, Yuki, and right-mindedness, Shoki. All of those are various types of ki. So, and that relates to the ki, as in like how to bring your sort of mind power out as an expression, as a true expression of yourself in martial arts.
Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of fans, and I don't blame them for asking this question, they say, when Goku was gathering energy for the Genki Dama, the spirit bomb in the dub, they ask, and again, this is a problem with the dub changing the name because of the meaning behind the word Genki. They were like, well, how come when Gohan donated his energy, him being so strong during that time, why wasn't that enough to kill Buu? Does that mean Gohan is weaker? Does that mean Kid Buu is stronger? Well, no. Genki, the energy that, and I talked about this in a video with Herms a while back, the energy that Goku used for the Genki Dama is not just his strength. It's nothing to do with strength. It's more so the health energy, the positive energy, if that makes sense.
Right. Like there's kind of an example in Japanese. It's kind of, think Genki today, be Genki tomorrow. So you need to kind of, think with this positive, healthy energy sort of idea. That way, it kind of becomes a reality for you. And it's the same thing, it's been explained, in the same Toriyama interview I was talking about before, how some people can be healthy, but they don't feel energetic, or they can be sick, but maybe feel energetic. And that's Genki.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. That there's a big difference. Now, how does that relate to, I guess, an actual real-world ki? And also, tell us about silent ki.
Right, so you mentioned ki in your Ultimate Gohan video you did before we talked about Ultimate Gohan. And ki, you mentioned that it's the kind of shout that martial artists do in order to, add power to their techniques and whatnot. There are various types of ki, both vocal and silent. And the reason is because ki can mean, the actual act of the shout, but what it really more deeply refers to is the effect of that shout. Like the shout is sort of like the specific thing you do to unify your body and mind, ki being, mind, expressed as energy, in maybe like a figurative context, to, put everything you're doing together without any sort of hesitation or fear or anything like that in order to have like a specific effect. In martial arts, the ki shout that you do most commonly, say in like a karate class or a taekwondo class or something.
Or if you watch Power Rangers and they go, yeah!
Yeah,
what about that one?
It's, that sort of thing.
Yeah!
What it does is, so the center of your power in Eastern and Western martial arts is sort of like the area just below your navel, like kind of in the center of your body, around like where your hips are, like lower abdomen basically. And that's the same place we were talking about with like abdominal breathing last time, like deep breathing with the abdominal area. It's the same place. It all comes from the same place, no matter what the belief is or where it comes from.
When you watch a highly trained boxer, and I learned this from my buddy of mine who was a silver medalist in boxing years ago. He showed me some tricks. When you throw an uppercut or a good, hook, you're using your entire body from the bottom all the way up. People think that a hook is just, your arm, shoulder, and wrist doing the work. No, a strong rib-cracking hook or a liver kick, as El Wapo would say, that comes from the middle all the way up.
You got to have good footing. You got to be like grounded good with your footing, and then you got to move your hips. And that's what's going to generate those strong punches and kicks. That same area is what you focus on when you ki. You actually, like, the actual technique for it is kind of like a faster version of a meditative exhale. It's sort of like you suddenly kind of tighten your diaphragm and your abdominal area as opposed to kind of like bring the yell from really deep rather than just kind of shouting through your throat. It's similar to like in one of Kevin Hart's specials when he was talking about say it with your chest. It's sort of the same thing, only you're going even deeper. You're saying it from your gut, which doesn't sound nearly as cool. And what that does in real life, depending on where you are in, like how you apply it in martial arts, it can, in all cases, it brings out power, it brings out energy, it brings out ki, it unifies your body and mind to cause an effect. And these effects can be anything like putting more power in your strike. What it does, you have to breathe a certain way when you throw a strike, otherwise there's not going to be any power behind it. And when you breathe that way and your mind is a certain way, then you're going to be way stronger than you are if you just throw your arm out there, So that's like putting ki into your punches. It's assisting your attacks. It can also help you overcome your own fear by clearing your mind. And fear is, a type of thing that's going to get in the way of your ki.
We've seen that in Dragon Ball too.
Like when like Gohan, when he was like a little boy and he's trying to fight Nappa, like he's not that strong when he's afraid, But when he gets mad and he forgets about his fear, he suddenly can just put out tons of power for that moment that his mind and body were unified and he forgot about his fear and his mind was clear, And what it can also do is it can shield you from damage and help you overcome your own pain. So it can, in physical context, it tightens up the muscles of your core, which you should be training already as a martial artist. And so that, you can absorb more damage either from falling or from being hit by something. And it also, helps you overcome pain, like that pain feeling. You can let it out with a shout. The same thing, you stub your toe and you curse. It's the same sort of idea. That curse comes from somewhere deep within. It's not just you being all like, oh darn it. It's got meaning behind it. It's passionate. It's got real feeling behind it. And that's sort of it's got real emotional content. And that's what ki is. It's sort of emotional content expressed figuratively as energy. And then also it can help psych you up in general before, say you're an athlete on a sports team and you're psyching yourself up before a game. That's ki right there. That's a form of ki. So, and those are, and that's just the vocal versions of it.
It's mental and physical.
And that's just the vocal version of it. You don't need, but there's also the silent version of it, which goes even deeper. And that, my favorite example of that, because it also sort of relates to Dragon Ball, is a ritual before a sumo match called shikiri. Now, the ki and shikiri means something else. It's not the same ki as like ki energy. It's written with a different kanji. But shikiri can be translated out as towing the line. And it's when sumo wrestlers are in the ring before they go back to their starting spaces and they're staring each other down. You see this sort of thing in like mixed martial arts matches or boxing matches when the fighters are at the center of the ring and they're staring each other down, and the referee is explaining the rules before sending them back to their corners. It's the same thing. It's building up ki in the fighters, and it's also building up anticipation and excitement in the audience too, and which you can get energy from being cheered on by the audience, just like a Genki Dama, and or by your friends or by whoever, and that's a silent ki right there. But with sumo, that process usually lasts up to a full 4 minutes before they even fight. Before the 1920s, there was no time limit to it. So it could last for a very long time. And it was in the mid-1920s that there was a time limit placed on that of 10 minutes. And now it's been shortened again and again down to 4 minutes in modern times. So
yeah, because they got to get to the action quick, man. I get
it. Right.
So,
but Dragon Ball, there are these huge power-ups and there are these huge stare-downs that last for a really long time while both fighters get ready to give it their best and they're letting each other get to their strongest so they can fight each other at their strongest. It's the same thing in sumo wrestling. It's the same thing when there's a stare-down before a boxing match or whatever. It's just more pronounced in sumo than it is in any other combat sport. And that right there, that's silent ki. You can bring out that power you were talking about in your Ultimate Gohan video without necessarily having to make noise. But going back to making noise, I'm sure some people are wondering about maybe the ki blast, the Kamehameha, that sort of thing. A ki with the right sort of timing can create a startle reflex in a person. It can scare your opponent. I've felt this before, even if we're ki, I knew the person was about to ki. Like I was at a Taekwondo competition and I'm sitting around waiting for my turn in the kata competition, the forms competition. And the guy who's going before me is doing the same form, so I know exactly when he's going to ki. And he does, but his ki was so practiced and so strong that even though I knew it was coming, it still made me tense up. And that tensing right there in a fight can be your split-second opening you need to throw that head kick that knocks somebody out or something. And when well-trained, it can actually do some pretty crazy stuff. For example, there was a story of a guy named Masoyama. He was the creator of a full-contact karate, bare-knuckle fighting in Japan. It's called Kyokushinkai, and there's a lot of different organizations that do it now, but it all comes from him. Back in the early 60s, he was with one of his foreign students, and they were walking to his favorite Korean restaurant when a group of kind of tough-looking guys, kind of were lurching and leering toward them in a way that, was like, hey, we're going to, kind of mess with you and maybe, try and start a fight with you. And Oyama, this powerful karate guy who had been training in the mountains solitary for months at a time and then coming down and beating people up full contact, he actually just stopped right at them and just let out this sort of very short, powerful ki just right at them, focusing his energy at them over space. And with the people that he ki'd towards, they kind of froze for a moment. Looked like, they were just kind of drained of all the willpower that, they had before to kind of go and, fight him. And then they just kind of went about their separate ways. The tough guy slinked off, and he went off to the restaurant and with his student, and that was the end of it. And that's a very strong expression of your ability to fight and your physicality. Like, it's not something
it's almost like an intimidation.
It is. I mean? It's exactly that. And some people who might believe in ki as an actual substance would think that maybe he focused it at them through space. The same way that Goku used a ki to blow back Jis and Bata or Jace and Birder on Namek. He put both of his hands out and just blew them backwards. Or Oob did the same thing to Goku. And then that sort of thing in a more deeply concentrated form would be a ki blast, like a Kamehameha, and then even more deeply concentrated, something like a special beam cannon, Makan Kosapo, in Dragon Ball, of course. But in real life...
Yeah, that's a super focused attack. That is super focused on one spot.
Right, but in real life, that ki, like whether you think of it as like spiritual energy traveling through space and messing up another person's spiritual energy, or whether you think of it as kind of a psychological intimidation kind of thing, it comes from a real place. It comes from real passion. It comes from kind of Bruce Lee would say, put emotional content, put real feeling into your techniques. And ki is a technique, and you need to put real feeling into it. And you only get that from real training. You can't fake it. You can't, do an intimidating yell at a guy when you're, sloppy and, and out of shape and all that stuff. It's not going to work. But, if you're somebody who can back it up and really knock someone's head off or choke them out, and you give them that intimidating silent glare, it's like being stared down by Mike Tyson in his prime.
When Goku gives Piccolo that stare, and, in the manga and in the anime, when he's about to fight Piccolo, when he first shows up in the battlefield to King Castle, that's it right there. He gives him the look. And I love how whenever you see a character do that, you see the villain hesitate for just a moment. Even when Goku showed up the first fight, Final Form Frieza, in that moment, Frieza could have mopped the floor with Goku because Frieza was much stronger, at that time. But still, the way that Goku was coming up all serious, and you literally saw the energy protruding from his body. Like, it was almost like that's an example of the series using it. It's right there. And there's other anime that do this, and not just Dragon Ball. Tons of shows do this, and manga.
Goku versus Piccolo in the 23rd Budokai, or lots of other anime where you'll see two people stare each other down, and you see lightning coming out of their eyes and sort of meeting in the middle. That's what that is. That's the real version of it. Whether you believe it's spiritual energy or whether it's all just kind of psychology and physics and biomechanics to you, it works. And it's something that you can actually training your martial arts techniques. That builds up your willpower, that builds up your focus, that builds up your mind. And mind power is key.
I'm not going to go into the story, but I've gotten into altercations with very big, muscular gym guys, and these dudes are completely jacked. And they're not very strong. And I mean that very bluntly. Just because someone goes to the gym and lifts a lot of weights does not necessarily mean they know how to utilize that power correctly. And that's the thing. We see that in Dragon Ball all the time. Nappa is 3 times the size of Goku, dude. And Goku throws him around like a jabroni. And in real world, I know tons of big muscular dudes who go in there and they get destroyed. Just watch any MMA. We've seen it, especially in Japan. Because in Japan, it's unregulated, or at least it used to be unregulated. So you had what they call freak show fights. Go in the gym and lift all you want to. If you don't know how to utilize that power, what good is it, You look good. You can be in front of a magazine, right? Or on the cover of a magazine.
Right, and, the Toriyama said himself, no matter how much you train, there are limits to physical strength, and the only way to overcome that is through ki. Ki being, the power of your mind, the ability to unify mind and body through something like ki, in order to put that extra oomph into what you're doing so that, a punch that may, hurt a little bit becomes something that's going to knock somebody out.
A lot of these masters are kind of older guys, but they retain that strength. Like, I've seen 40, 50-year-old men still retain, maybe they're not as strong, they still retain more strength and more power than the average person, even though they have a big beer belly, a big gut, because that lifetime of training has kind of made your body, I don't know what the word is, I guess accustomed to it would be the right word.
I think another good example would be like Helio Gracie, the founder of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. When he was old, he would say to somebody who was in their 20s, he goes, okay, yeah, we'll grapple, but you're not going to beat me. And, he's an old guy, and he's not, about to, lift, he's not about to deadlift 400 pounds or anything like that. And through sort of the calm, confident focus that he can put into his grappling, they're going to get frustrated and eventually give up because they can't beat this 80-year-old man.
If you punch him in the face, you're going to hurt the guy. But if you actually just grapple and you start on the ground, this is from everything I've read about the guy, he will get you. He might seem like an old man, but he'll get you. And it's interesting because, in a street fight, it's different. You can kick a brick, throw a brick at his head, and you probably took his life at that point. But if you actually are going by the rules of what he knows, then, it's just interesting to me because you have people who live long lives and live healthy lives doing this. They don't even look healthy, some of them, but it's just something that's internal. You know what I mean?
It is.
And mental, like you said. Everybody check out Kendamu. We've already plugged your channel a lot. Very unique content, unique perspective here about not just Dragon Ball, but Dragon Ball's connections to the martial arts. When Roshi gets really buff, that's obviously in real life, okay? These old masters aren't going to end up looking chiseled, but that's a metaphor. Toriyama's giving us a metaphor for these old men getting focused, and they will kick your ass. I mean, we've seen it. We've seen old dudes throw around young dudes like nothing, like Roshi does, without actually being buff. It's a metaphor for them having that state of mind.
And
so in other words, they're mentally buff, if that makes sense.
Someone like Boss Rutan or Chuck Liddell those guys are still gonna be able to, really throw down in a real fight, even if they're not, beating the young guys who are coming into the UFC, this year.
Right, and also, look at Randy Couture. Randy Couture found the Founding Youth world champion in his 40s. It really is all about conditioning, and he's a wrestler. He obviously, nowadays, as you know, you have to study a little bit of everything, but he wasn't one of those guys that his whole life he was learning jiu-jitsu, judo. He learned wrestling first, and that was his base, but the principles are still there.
Exactly.
Leverage, breathing. It's like almost the same thing, and like judo and wrestling are very, very similar. Not identical, but they're very similar in what they teach.
They're similar and they use the same principles. Different words might be used, but it's the same thing. We'll go with striking since it's a more dynamic, easier example. Someone might say put ki into it, when they're doing a punch in karate. But in boxing, they're going to have the same hip turning, they're going to have the same breathing, they're going to have the same focus, but they're going to call it something like, really, put your heart into it, show some real fighting spirit. It's the same thing.
Check out Kendamu. Any final thoughts, man?
I just want to, thank you for bringing me on to ramble about this stuff. It's definitely, it's a really deep set of concepts that's kind of difficult to put into the world, but it's really fun once you start kind of really reading into it.
It's the deeper parts of Dragon Ball and of the world, really, not just Dragon Ball, but Dragon Ball does borrow a lot of it. So hopefully we've helped you understand how it works in the series and how it works in the real world. So once Kendamu opens up his dojo, go head over there. But in the meantime, go to his channel.
Give me another 10 years. Yeah, in the meantime, just check out my YouTube.
We'll talk to you down the road.